Welcome, everybody, to episode 7 of the Community CloudCast. I'm joined by my regular co-host, Mr. Paul McCollum, and Mr. Jason Himmelstein. Gentlemen, how are things this month?
Cold.
Windy.
A little
Windy
of both.
cold.
A little of both. A little quick housekeeping before we get into things for this month. As always, join us every month on the third Thursday or thereabouts around noon U.S. Central Time, subject to change based on guest availability. You can always monitor our YouTube channel and our Facebook feed. If you hop over to the YouTube channel, click subscribe and like, you'll get notified when we've got new posts coming up after the live stream goes onto YouTube, and I'll go in and edit all the comments with links and whatnot in the show description. So be sure to check that out over on the YouTubes. And we are joined this month by very special guest, Mr. Robert Bogue, whom we all know and love. Mr. Bogue, how are you, sir?
I am quite well, thank you. I am luckily here. I do not get to live in Texas, and so while you're talking about cold weather, I have it cold.
You have real cold weather.
I have real cold weather. Now, our Canadian friends are going to go, no, you have no idea, but for us,
and those in Minnesota as well, right?
So we're 2 minutes in, and I've tried to offend somebody with a bad accent.
You've probably succeeded.
Good.
Which is 2 minutes longer than it normally takes the rest of us. So those are rookie numbers.
Dang, I'll try harder next time.
So, of course, we want to thank our sponsors who make all of this happen. Aptigent, you can go check out our Power Tools product at aptigent.com. And you can find it, of course, in Power Automate and Power Apps right there in the connectors gallery. Please be sure to check that out. Can't do this without our sponsors. Want to mention some upcoming events. It is good to be able to do this again, since for quite a long time we had no events whatsoever to speak of except virtual events. So most of these are real and in person or hybrid, starting with one today, as a matter of fact, that our very own
Eric, to be fair, they're all real. They're all real.
They're all real.
Just making sure we're clear. They're all like the Cactus Force, even though it sounds made up, Paul promises it's real.
So he says. I'm not sure what content he'll be sharing on that. But Paul, why don't you tell us, what is a Cactus Force?
A Cactus Force is the Phoenix, Arizona regional Salesforce conference. Texas Dreamin' is one that I usually attend. This would be the first Cactus Force I go to. So there are Dreamins and there are forces. There's about 10 or 15. So Cactus Force is one of the bigger U.S. ones, and it's going on hybrid today and tomorrow.
And you have a session, right?
Yeah, I'm presenting. So their declarative workflow tool, which took Nintex, Power Automate, formerly K2. Salesforce has a native flow engine that they keep adding functionality to, and I found a bit of a exploit, if you will, if we say in the gaming industry, but a hack pattern to get it to. Normally, you only size about 1,000 records or so at a time that you want to do with one of these flows. So you're not working with big data; you're working with you're not doing batch processes. You're working with, okay, I click this, let me go check that. This comes back and says you need to fill out 4 of these. But there's they keep adding stuff to it that makes it more and more powerful. And I kind of stumbled across a pattern that I've been sharing with people on how to get it to do millions of records as opposed to just thousands. So it's a game changer kind of pattern, as long as Salesforce doesn't decide to shut it down, or you don't wreck your org by accidentally creating infinite loops. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. Rob, you were going to say something?
So am I the only person that, as I'm reading this Cactus Force, I'm hearing you guys talk about it, like I have this picture of Star Wars clones as all cactuses. I'm like,
these are not the succulents you're looking for.
Someone's got a lightsaber
the
somewhere.
sequel to Troops.
Yeah, Rob, I'm not caught up on Book of Boba Fett. Maybe it's in there somewhere. I'm getting kind of lost with that one. So I'll bite.
Maybe it's a crossover too. Maybe that's like Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's not a root; it's a cactus. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be. Although I believe I can still lay claim as to having been the only speaker at a Microsoft conference ever to threaten the audience with a lightsaber from stage.
Yep.
I believe I still own that.
SP Yoda.
SP Yoda, that's right. SP Yoda. Good memory.
Do you also still have the only one to ride in a stick horse?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
As far as I know. At least on stage. There may have been stick horses at the after party. For all
It's all infamy.
Right. Collab Days. February 23rd, Bletchley Park in the UK. I will be there, assuming that the country is still open and they're letting us in. I will be there attending that, as it's only our only Collab Days event on the calendar at the moment. I'm sure there will be more added later on in the year as things continue to open up. And then, of course, the Microsoft 365 conference in Las Vegas. Yes, another one. I know there was just one not too long ago in Vegas, but there's another one coming up. And I'm pretty sure, I know Jason will be there. Rob, are you going to be at that one as well?
I don't know yet. I haven't heard. I was at the last one though, and by the way, it overlapped with the paranormal convention.
Sweet.
It was
Vegas. Isn't that always going on, Rob?
and NFR at the same time. So you had ghost cowboys and SharePoint people.
Exactly. It's like a bad movie.
I like it. I like it. All right. And then ShareCloud Summit is coming up again. It's the only event we have booked in Dallas in the spring. That will be on May 11th in Irving. There's another event later on in the year here as well. So those are the things presently on the calendar. Hopefully more of them will be added as well going forward. So each one of us has our little around the horn section, and then we'll move on into our primary discussion with Mr. Bogue. So let's start with you, Paul. What have you got for us this week in your office hours segment?
And switch to partner cloudy news on the screen. There has been an evening off period, it seems, from big acquisitions and big players in the cloud space from the Salesforce side. There's the last couple of acquisitions kind of took Salesforce from kind of an in-platform sales tool and really started to expand out its high mega processing capability, elastic compute, and reporting. So the acquisitions of Slack, Tableau, MuleSoft, and Velocity have been finished for about a year now, but the bringing them in as first-class citizens is what's going on. So there's a lot of polish going on. There's not a whole lot of big news at the cloud level. I've been struggling to find big acquisitions or big changes in Heroku but those things, the components already exist. They're just making the IDE API interfaces better, stronger, and easier for the declarative developers to use and leverage all of these, integration platforms, big data reporting platforms, and then Slack for collaboration. Velocity, which is now Salesforce Industries, is a bunch application data models. So those go on. Those are being kind of polished and honed and fit into the ecosystem. So those are the big things that we see. They published roadmaps for all of their products now, so you can go out and check out at architect.salesforce.com things that are happening, things that they plan to roll in over the next 2 or 3 year period, so you can start tracking their builds and make sure you're not reinventing a wheel that's about to come off the production line. Now, if I could hazard a guess, and don't bank on this, the biggest areas of development and some of the biggest areas that I see third-party add-ins in that space, and you guys can tell me if you're seeing it too, are in DevOps and security. So some big DevOps players are there. I wouldn't be surprised if one of those either made kind of like a first tier or was an acquisition target. That seems to be the biggest news and the biggest developments, and the exciting explosion of ecosystem has been around that. So it's also good to see on that same thing that the focus is on architects. So the architect.salesforce.com is fairly new. There's a new architect blog on Medium where you can go in and kind of scan what things are doing. But being in platform dev only, having cross-platform architects haven't been first tier citizens, but they're starting to roll out a lot of architecture perspectives, a lot of guidelines, when to use what, when to integrate this versus that. And that's exciting to see because that's been a weakness for a while. MFA is rolling out across the ecosystem. You can't hardly log into anything with Salesforce without some sort of multi-factor. So I don't know. You'll have to let me know where they are ahead of a pace of forcing that on everybody, which is what is going on. It's not optional anymore. Salesforce Functions we talked about for a while, which is an easy connect to a Dockerized compute container, has gone wide release, and I'm hoping to get to play with that a little bit more in the future. MuleSoft and VS Code.dev, so web-based versions of the MuleSoft IDE and Visual Studio Code. I think there's still some gaps on Visual Studio Code becoming a fully fledged the IDE for Salesforce, the online version, just because some of the package and integrations with Git and stuff like that. But that continues to progress. So I love the.
Is that for doing Lightning components? Because the CLI stuff, we do all of our development out of VS Code for the Salesforce managed packages and stuff, but that's all CLI.
Well, the CLI is doing the work, but it's a local install of VS Code. There's an online version of VS Code that Microsoft released a while ago. That it's the previous development. A lot of previous development in Salesforce you could do in a web-based IDE, and I really enjoyed their web-based IDE. It was tuned. VS Code's a little bit generic for me, but the web-based VS Code and some plugins and CLI integration promise to make that a little better. I love not having to worry about which machine I'm on, and can go do dev from wherever and not have to do the installs and all the configs. So hopefully that's continuing.
Cool.
And then, speaking at Cactus Force tomorrow. So a lot of good speakers, a lot of high-level architects speaking there. So it should be good topics.
Good stuff. Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Jason, moving on to you. I understand that January is a bit of a quiet time in the Power BI world.
Yeah, it's real quiet. We had our last major blog post. We had two this week. One talking about leveraging, .NET, .NET apps with Power BI. Not really a major post, and the other one was a little bit of a roll up about talking about deployment pipelines and the fact that data flows are GA and things of that nature. But before that, it was December 17th was the last post from the Power BI product team. A lot of Microsoft goes quiet right around, December 15th through, the end of the year, beginning of January time. I don't know why. It's not like anything major's happening that people would be taken off for or anything. It seems arbitrary.
There are other people besides you, Jason.
Sorry?
There are other people besides you. There's some people, they have different beliefs.
Oh, that's right.
Oh no, Jason covered this on a previous session, Rob.
Right. There Christmas, so
they're
Christmas
not.
and New Year's,
Okay.
Christmas.
See, for me, it's
that's just one day.
Movies, it's not a big deal, I just keep working.
There's a tree rather than a candle. It's okay.
No, so the Hanukkah was so early this year, it felt kind of weird.
It was in a different month.
Yeah, but. With all of that said, December is end of December, beginning of January. It's always a quiet month. We haven't had a Power BI desktop or service update in the past 3 or 4 years during the month of January because they take the time off and they're not trying to rush it in. So we get bigger drops coming in February through May. It tends to really come together. Lots of great stuff, lots of good conversations happening at this point that we're seeing. A lot of folks moving seats on the bus. If you watch LinkedIn, a lot of folks leaving the product team, a lot of folks coming onto the product team, a lot of changes that have been happening. Azure Synapse Analytics really starting to spark quite a bit in the conversation. Power BI, very active still out there. Some really cool stuff in the community. There was actually a Power BI learning advent calendar that an MVP put together. It was kind of neat to see who was behind each door every day. It was kind of a cool thing. It was learning resources, which was fun. But beyond that, there's really not much happening in the world of Power BI at the moment that's brand spanking new. A lot of great stuff to be continuing down the path of. And having Mr. Bogue here today, to talk about end user topics sort of fits in. Like, we're at a point in time where it's worth talking about and seeing some of the new changes that have happened. So I'm looking forward to having Power BI be part of this conversation with Rob.
Cool. Good stuff. Thank you, sir. Well, a few things from the Azure side, and I'll be brief so we can get rocking with Mr. Bogue. Static web apps now gone enterprise edge, which essentially means that you have the regional and global load balancing for static web apps. A lot of people are adopting these, especially for JavaScript spas and whatnot. They're quick and easy to spin up, dirt cheap. They cost almost nothing to run. Of course, in order to properly do enterprise edge, you have to have Azure Front Door in place, which there's some cost associated with that, obviously. But it's good to see that growing up into a full-fledged product. A couple of other things that caught my eye, interestingly enough, is we do cognitive services on the back end with some of our Power Tools actions. So I'm pretty familiar with it. And Microsoft is partnering up with a company called XPE&G to deliver cognitive services, primarily their neural text-to-speech and speech-to-text to vehicle systems. So your Android-driven type of user interface displays that you have in a lot of higher end vehicles these days. If you've worked with those, you know that the text or the voice processing, it's pretty good, but it can be pretty clunky. But they're now integrating the neural bits of cognitive services in that. I can tell you that neural stuff can be scarily good. We did a bunch of testing on text to speech. We don't use the neural, we use the regular in our endpoints, but we did a bunch of testing with it. I could tell you some of the things, especially if you're sending like an SGML file into it, you absolutely cannot tell the difference between the computer generated AI voice and a human voice. It's scarily good. So that's an interesting piece. I thought of speech driven inputs in vehicles. Another one that caught my eye was, and this actually happened sometime back, but it's starting to come to fruition now. Microsoft actually bought a network topology infrastructure built by AT&T for their mobile service. AT&T basically built they call it an on-premise cloud, which sounds kind of silly, but they built a cloud infrastructure to run in their AT&T data centers to do software-defined networking and cloud network functions and other things like that in their proprietary network. And Microsoft has bought that and included it in Azure and is now calling it something called Azure for Operators, which it's all standards compliant, so it's not proprietary, but you can run carrier grade signaling over that network. Now, that's all sounds good, except for those of us who are AT&T customers that are pretty frustrated with their network a lot. I'm not sure maybe that was the best choice of network topologies to purchase. But in any event, Azure for Operators is now live and available. Can't imagine there's a very big market for that, but it's interesting nonetheless. And then finally, something that just sort of follow from time to time, just because it's interesting, is what they're doing with the geospatial side from satellites and whatnot. So a couple of things happening here that are interesting. First is their orbital piece and SpaceEye, which kind of work together to give you views of the Earth that are not obscured by clouds. That's what SpaceEye does. It's an interesting piece where they take radar imaging from satellites, they combine it with images that they already have in the Azure mapping database to give you a sort of AI view of what it looks like underneath the cloud. So one of the biggest problems that we have is that 60% of the Earth at any given time is covered with clouds. And so it's hard to penetrate that from geospatial mapping. But with this sort of AI driven SpaceEye piece, that they're doing something really clever. And then if you take the Project Turing bit, which is enhancing message or enhancing images that look more familiar to the human eye. So if we, when you're typically looking at geospatial images, they're really flat. Like if you looked on Google Earth and whatnot, they lack detail and depth because they're just this overhead bird's eye view. But the Project Turing stuff applies AI and adds depth to those images, so it's much more pleasing and engaging to the human eye and better for mapping purposes. And the other piece of Orbital that's interesting is they've bought a bunch of, or partnered to get, I'm not sure which, a bunch of land-based satellite relay stations. So you can now, in Azure, if you have a satellite in the air, communicate with that satellite via standardized protocols through this base of stations right from in your Azure portal. So if you think, when we talk big data, it doesn't get any bigger data than that, right? Massive amounts of geospatial data that you can now process through things like Azure Synapse and whatnot, because you can communicate with those satellites via your Azure portal. So I thought that was pretty cool stuff.
That's amazing. They have finally defeated privacy.
Soundly. No more hiding behind the cloud for you, sir.
I don't know.
I can't hide behind clouds now.
I'm thinking about like the Star Wars stuff, you know, Reagan and all that stuff. I'm like, I don't know that I want somebody hacking the satellites. I don't know what they can do. They just seem to have cameras, but I'm still not comfortable with it.
I'm sure they have more than cameras up there now.
Yeah, probably.
And we're awfully close to building Skynet here, aren't we, people? Let's be honest.
Yeah, uprising imminent.
You presume it's not already there.
Yeah. I think it is, and it's called Azure and AWS. So those are just a few of the interesting things that caught my eye.
It's not Azure news, but I thought the news about Activision being bought, Blizzard Activision, was kind of interesting. That was in the Microsoft space. That Microsoft is now a game company,
which they always have been, but they haven't been a cross-platform game company, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, now they're but now they're a sports company, because it's all the esports is really, I think, what they bought.
Right.
Well, did Microsoft have still have a game development studio? I know Xbox is hardware, but
do.
Okay.
Yeah, but Jason is right. This now puts them squarely into the esports space as not a player, but the player in the esports, because EA owns all that.
Yep.
So you got to think they've got big plans for how to monetize all of that and bring
$86 billion. So I really hope they know how to monetize it, because Yammer. Yeah, never mind.
You said it before I did.
That's not the only one.
Yep.
That's true.
Hey, Nokia. Sorry.
Yeah. So
I can't wait till I can work Word with a controller.
An interesting move for sure. All right. So moving on from our news roundup, let's get into our featured guest presentation with the one and only Mr. Rob Bogue. Now, Rob has his fingers in a lot of pies, as many of you who know Rob know already. But we're certainly not limited to any topics today, but we thought we would take as our sort of general theme end user adoption in the cloud. And this isn't limited to just Microsoft 365, right? As Jason mentioned, this can be Power BI. This applies to cloud only products like Salesforce. Sometimes it's hard to move people from on-prem stuff. What have you got there?
He's got my coin.
Oh, very nice.
Those are limited edition. No longer.
I always keep them handy.
Thor projects.
Well
Yeah.
played, sir. Well played. So, with that, Rob, let's talk end user adoption. Give us all of your great and deep knowledge.
Well, so let's have a so you guys, you've been doing this for a while, and you probably have come across this conversation before. And I want you to give me an answer here. So somebody comes to me yesterday and they say, should we clean up all the garbage, or I mean stuff on our file shares and then migrate to the cloud? Or should we migrate to the cloud and then clean it up? What do you guys say?
Jason, start with you.
Oh, you're gonna throw me under the bus?
Yes.
Yeah. The conversation is one of priorities, right? Like what it's not a singular answer. Yeah, there's not one specific. It's a matter of what are the priorities for the organization. That's where I start. That's how I always start all of those conversations. Well, we've got legacy hardware that's about to fall over. Well, then let's migrate all the crap and then we can clean it up later.
Or the second part doesn't happen.
Yeah. But it's the conversation. It's like, what are the priorities for the organization? Well, we're going to have $1 billion bill if we don't get off of this and move over to there. Or we've got all the time in the world and we really want to do this the right way. And so, well, let's go ahead and the conversation I always had, literally the conversation was, okay, great. Stop building new on the old platform. Start building on the old platform. Start building on the new. And then you start to do the migration into that infrastructure, but you sort of try and mirror how things are, but all new goes over here, all old stays over there, and you migrate what's needed and then eventually shut it down.
Yep.
Paul,
what about you?
Yeah, no, because the cost savings is usually something that is a business case around why you would do these migrations. Moving the thing off of the old hardware usually gets prioritized over an undefined reorganization strategy. And I'm dead serious about they move it as is. And we'll organize once it's there. Or, the tool will just solve all of our problems. We won't have that anymore, even if we migrate it. And the old diagram of the search
automatically
idiocy diagram, it's like, okay, I can't find anything. Blame search. Buy new tool. Set up new tool. Don't properly configure tool. Blame new tool.
Right.
And repeat. So, I've seen it multiple and then it just gets put off. The reorganization never happens. If you don't, you have to have somebody really strong to say, nope, that stuff's never coming over to my new system, and you'll have to drag it there piece at a time because I'm building Nirvana. And if you don't have that strength and the ability to light a fuse or delay the budget benefit that was nobody ever does things because it's easier to find stuff. Right. They do stuff because it's cheaper to get off the old system. And if you can't belay that to be cheaper and better, you just get cheaper.
Yeah. So I want to inject for just 2 seconds, Rob, because I'm going to use my home cleaning project that I'm doing right now as an analogy, right? We moved into this house 6 years ago. And crap has piled up to the point where my closet door over here wouldn't even close. Like it was starting to flow out.
Is your table okay back there in the corner? I see the table. It seems like it's getting weighted down.
Well, that's the last thing that's getting cleaned up. Okay. Literally everything that was under these blue tarps back here everything was just shoved in. Like nothing was organized. Now everything is organized. I have a friend who has a YouTube channel, Saving with Christina, who's been doing these personal finance and like all this other type of stuff that she's been, and she's been yelling at me because I've been helping her with that. And she comes into my office, she's like, I can't even walk in here anymore. It's just, you need to get this organized. So literally the last day, I'm on day 3 of a cleaning project that has taken 6 years. We just moved everything from my old office in New Hampshire in here. And it was lift and shift, exactly like Paul's talking about, until there's a catalyst that, it's like, if you don't clean this up, I'm going to come in here and do it for you.
Yeah.
And she would have. She would have thrown everything away. So she and my wife were conspiring. So, yeah. Anyway.
Nice. Conspiring.
Yeah.
Eric, what about you?
Well, as Jason just said, it doesn't matter what order you try and approach it in, it's never going to get done until the pain is great enough to make it get done, right? If you try and do it up front, your project's going to drag on. You're never going to get migrated unless they have a cost or failing hardware or something that makes that pain point great. If you do it afterwards or in process, as it were, unless the cost of moving that data or the cost of the storage when it gets to the other places is high enough, they're just going to move the junk as it is. So really, make it until it hurts. They're not going to do it. So either find a way to make it hurt, right, or show them that they're going to have pain to get them to engage in that process. That's been my experience.
Yeah. Okay, so now let me connect this back to the topic, right? Because you said, how do we get user adoption? And so one of the things that happens when people talk about user adoption is like, oh, well, I got to get everybody involved, blah, 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 right? The best user adoption happens when the people don't know they're changing. The best user adoption happens when they go, what do you mean we're using SharePoint? What do you mean we're on the cloud? What do you mean what do you mean? And so what I was talking about to the client yesterday, and I said, look, move it all, take your share, put it in a document library, reconnect it with sync, tell them their cheese moved just a little bit. And that's the end. That's all you tell them. Because then they can get over there and they can get used to it, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, so now I just got a mess in a different place, right? I've moved it from New Hampshire to Texas. Okay. But here's the thing. When you get to the cloud, the rules are different. When you're on a file share, the rules are totally, totally different than if you're up in the cloud. If you're on SharePoint, if you're on Dropbox, whatever, right? Like, I don't care what file platform you're on. There's a recycle bin on the network. You know, how many decades have we been doing network shares and we don't have recycle bins on network shares, right? So you change it so now it's safer for them to delete stuff and go, hey, it's going to stick around for 90 days or 180 days, whatever. And if you don't need it then, or if you need it before then, go fetch it out of the trash or the recycle bin. And if you don't, it's gone and you don't think about it anymore, right? So that's the psychology aspect of it. The other psychology aspect of these migrations are, how many of us have done a migration? You get to the other side of it, you're in the cloud, and someone complains, my stuff is missing, right? Whether it's this data field, whether it's this file, whether it's this, right? Everybody's like, oh, well, my stuff is missing. And they're like, you fire up the old systems, right? Like, you get the steam and the crank going and you get the old system up and you fire it up and you look for it. And you're like, it wasn't there, right? And so I think we've got to be really careful when we're trying to drive adoption. We can do the short-term stuff, right? And there's all the communications. We got all kinds of stuff we can talk about there. But we got to look at those long-term factors and how do we help them build confidence in the platform. And that I think is the thing that's going to get you not the first 6 months, but the first 6 years, right? If you can build that confidence into the platform. So I think that's super, super, super important.
But how do you bridge that misconception gap, though? They thought it was there. It wasn't. So now they're blaming the new platform, but it was never there all along.
Yeah, some of that's your validation, right? Like, so you got to validate, there are 15,317 and there's 15,317. Sometimes you got to, fire up the old thing and go, no, it wasn't there. See, like, oh, I thought it was there. But that confidence in the platform is in some ways about not making too many changes when you make the migration. Right. I've seen lots and lots of people. They're like, oh, I'm going to totally reorganize and blah, blah, blah. We're going to move to the cloud. And then people get there and they're like, I can't find anything. I hate this thing because it's not comfortable. It's not convenient. It's not what they're used to. Right. And you're like, use search, and they use search and they get 15,000 entries. Right. Like, ah. And so that's kind of the tricky part, is how do you make that migration as clean as you can, and then leverage the tools on the back end, right? Leverage the capabilities. Every cloud platform has more capabilities than on-prem, every single one, right? Like, I could be migrating to anything. It doesn't matter. It's going to have more capabilities than I had on-prem. So get there and then start working on the adjustments, and don't do it right away, by the way. Give them 30 days, 60 days, something to settle, and then start making the changes. So it's not easy, but it's also about paying attention to people.
Well, but do you then run the risk of you get them on the platform, they're starting to get used to it, then you start making changes, and it's bad enough in the cloud that changes are happening all the time that we don't control, right? Are you churning the pot too much when you do that?
So you can, right? Like you go, hey, I'm going to use a nuclear explosion over here and make everything go boom. Or you can set a very, very long retention rule, 20 years, right? 20 years, no modification, right? And then the next year or the next month, it's 19. Then it's 18, 17, 16, 15. And you keep closing that gap in until you start to get some of that back pressure. You start to see the support calls. You start to see what's happening. And you go, okay, so now I'm going to just settle there for a little bit.
Yep. We did a lot of, I tried to do on a couple of different times when we had people that we couldn't get to adopt strategies for usability around their data, or, have a plan or participate in a migration. We started virtualizing their systems and putting them behind for more and more hoops. Yeah. You can still get to your library. You're just going to have to RDP to the server first, right, and then transfer that content up from there. And you have to put those challenges. Okay, that's a lot of work every day that I'm going to do. Okay, I should just go in or you do that and then you track the usage. And if nobody connects to it for 2 years, like, you do not need this. And you set those time bombs on them as well.
Yeah. Well, and we've powered off systems, not told anybody, right?
Scream tests. I do scream tests all the time.
Yeah.
What did you call it? A scream test? I like it.
You turn it off to see who screams.
Yeah.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
If nobody screams for a month, they're not using it. So.
Yeah, but so what do you guys think? So what I find is the projects that struggle with user adoption don't consider the people, right? There's these elaborate multi-dimensional project plans with all the tasks and risks and all that stuff. But it's like, oh yeah, and at the end there's one task. Tell everybody it's done. Right?
Yeah, communication plans are key. Hey, new things coming, change is happening. You're getting new features, but it's a matter of how do you communicate it. You don't go, we're moving your cheese, and then but instead, hey, look, you're going to get all this new stuff. When you look at it, and this is the way I always explained it to people. It's like when you don't want to think about a migration. Nobody wants to think about a migration. You think about how horrible the last one was. You think about your cell phone.
Moves.
You think about your cell phone, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I got an upgrade. You didn't get an upgrade. You migrated from an old thing to a new thing, and it's completely new and different.
Yep.
And yeah, you're going to complain a little bit about it, but after 3 days, you don't know how you lived without it before. And you love it. And if somebody tried to take your cell phone away from you, you would break their fingers. That's the way that I try and think about it. And I've always tried to encourage people. It's like, think about the feature benefits that they're getting. Explain it to them in that way. Never say the word migrate. Always say the word upgrade, because what's the semantic difference between the two? Nobody's inserting a disk into a machine and running an upgrade anymore. That's not how it works, right? We're moving to the cloud. No, you're moving. That's scary. No, we're upgrading everything. Oh, okay. It's a different feel. Yeah.
One of the trends that I saw that I think may have stalled, or I may just not have visibility to it anymore. So IT projects are almost always a budget project. And I saw more than a couple budget project or projects, IT projects, that when leaders changed and they were looking to trim the budget, a 2-year migration and library tool had 70% of the project funds, or 30% of the project funds cut, that were all training.
Yep.
So training to use the tool that they were implementing to solve all these problems got cut, because the only financial incentive was the only financial case was made was, this is a technology project. We are changing technologies that will save us this much money. The trend to have digital departments and about the tools. And if you don't make adoption a key metric and have that as a first class requirement, then you get stuff like this all the time. You're still just running the budget problems. But if you set, and it's still hard to quantify productivity returns, and it's definitely hard to do that from an IT department. But those digital departments with testing, with metrics, productivity surveys, if they are properly embedded into an organization and have healthy control over the way things are done, can be a huge benefit and can kind of change those tides from whether they are operational projects versus technology projects.
Yeah.
So, Rob, let me ask you the question, because I know my answer and I know my number. How many projects are you seeing these days that are IT driven versus business driven?
Unfortunately, I see a lot of IT projects.
I'm seeing it exactly reverse.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
The customers that I work with, none of them are coming along because the IT department says, hey, we're going to do. It's because the business says we need to be able to do this better, different, faster. And IT is getting in our way. And we want to be able to do. So we end up having to go back and have the conversation with IT. It's never about budget at that point. It's always about tooling, governance, and process at the end, and and FUD. The fear of, oh, what do you mean we're going? You want to move us to the cloud? But I can unplug the server right here if there's a problem. That I can do, right? Like those are the problems that I see. And granted, I work in a tax world, so it's a little different. But
once you get to that cloud functionality and less focus is put on maintaining infrastructure, and it's more about purchasing functionality, that does start to swing it. That is, I think, possibly a very intended side effect of moving to the cloud. It's like, I don't have to worry about storage anymore.
Yeah, I worry about how IT departments are going to change. I just that they're not turning wrenches anymore. They're trying to enable customers. And candidly, as an industry, we've done a very bad job of that over the past several decades. I think so you're talking about, is it IT or business? I would say the projects I love are the projects that are about the business, right? Hey, we have a 94% rework rate. We need to drop that. And I'm like, no kidding. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Right. And in a year, we move it from 94 to 24. Right. And 24 is still way too much, just to be clear. Mm-hmm. Right. A 24% rework rate is awful. But dropping it 70%, the business is amazed. Right. The dollars that drop to the bottom line, nobody cares about an E3 license for 300 people. Like, it's not material anymore. Right. So yeah, no, I would love for it to all be business. I would love for every one of my customers to be a business customer with a defined problem, because then, Paul, as you were talking about, like there's metrics behind it, right? I can say I saved you $5 million, and I know that because you spent $5 million more last year on rework.
It's an interesting generational thing too, maybe, and I'm just throwing this out. It just occurred to me. So, my first generation of compute consulting was technology is going to solve so many of your productivity problems. We need computers everywhere. Stop using that paper spreadsheet. I need to show you Excel. It's going to change your world.
Lotus 1, 2, 3.
Exactly. Lotus. Exactly. And
it works.
Yeah, no, I mean, word perfect for DOS.
Yeah.
I was there. But as soon as we hit a good tipping point, we hit the Melissa SQL Slammer, lock everything down. It has to be secured. We have too many assets now. The new philosophy is that we have got to over control everything. Productivity is nice, but dead stops due to SQL Slammer and Melissa and all that stuff and hacking, and that became the new IT mentality. So it was enable everything, and then it was lock everything down. And now those, but most of the IT departments still come from that only provide people the functionality that we can afford to secure 1,000%, because that's what I'm accountable for. And we don't have, it's the UX perspective started to peek its head out, and productivity. You know, we've all been there when collaboration was kind of brought up and then stalled, and then user experience was a big deal, and it's still a big deal, but only after you do all of the other stuff. So I'm hoping that some of the consolidation of everything provides us, hey, we don't have to worry about infrastructure. And yeah, we almost kind of don't have to worry about security as much anymore. We still need to. It still needs to be ingrained, but I need to be equally trained on how to serve customers and serve people for productivity, and teach them how to operate securely, not only one and not the other.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah. Eric, you're being unusually quiet.
Well, I'm actually thinking about an earlier point you made, which was around focusing on the people instead of the technology, or what all too happens the other way around. I'm thinking about, we work with a nonprofit that has a lot of older, and I mean significantly older, users in their user base, a lot of whom are volunteers. And they've spent the last 15 years on SharePoint and getting used to a very specific method of operating. Now we have to take them to the cloud. It's that pain point where they no longer can stay where they are. They have to transition. And this is not a small problem or a training problem even, or a communication problem. You're trying to get a workforce that is not technology friendly to begin with, to move into the cloud, for everything to change,
Yeah.
as far as they're concerned, and to get them to adopt these new tools. They're going to hate it. They're going to rebel, because a lot of them are volunteers. They're just going to refuse to use it and walk away, right? That's a really difficult problem to solve. And we haven't solved the problem. We're talking about how to solve the problem. So that human component in that scenario is way more important than the technology. How do you deal with that?
I think Jason hit the high point earlier when he was talking about features and benefits, and what are you going to get, not what's changing, right? I think the other thing is we sometimes see things which are not real. So here's the thing: people don't resist change. And Paul, I hope that
Paul is seeing things that aren't real right now.
Paul's cat's about to freak out on him too.
He keeps that up.
Like, wow. But so we think that there's this resistance thing for change, for any kind of change, and it's not really true. There's two underlying causes that lead people to think that. Now, one is they don't understand, and anytime somebody doesn't understand something, they freeze. Right? It's not fight, flight, or freeze. They just freeze. When the kids were teenagers, I'd, say take out the trash, and they, the next day the trash should still not be taken out. And you're like, what are you missing? Right? And they're like, I didn't know which trash you wanted me to take out. Would be the kitchen trash, because that's the only one we ever change. Right? I didn't know where you wanted me to take it to. Well, the trash, the exterior trash cans, that would be where it's, well, but I didn't know when. Well, when I told you would have been a good time, right? but I say that, obviously tongue in cheek, but the thing is, like, how are we communicating in enough detail to folks about what is changing, why it's changing, and what they're going to get? The other reason, by the way, that people will seem to resist, they'll have the appearance of resistance, is they disagree. I don't think we should go to the cloud because it's not safe, or it's, I'm afraid of rain, or whatever, right? Like, you are not the witch from the Wizard of Oz. You will be fine.
I don't know. I think she's at several of my clients, I believe.
Yeah.
That's where the lightning comes from, though, Rob.
The flying monkeys, yeah. That was an old SharePoint thing. We need to bring the flying monkeys back. That was good.
Let's not bring the flying monkeys back, lest I give some other poor soul in my audience a mere heart attack.
Yeah. So, but I think how do you look at things like resistance and break them down and say, okay, well, they either don't understand or they disagree. Which is it? If they disagree, can I persuade them either to agree with me or to accept that we're doing an experiment, and if it fails, we'll go do whatever they said, right? Like, if I can't make this work, then we'll go do whatever you want to try. I don't care. And how do you put those pieces in place so that they feel more comfortable, they feel more heard, they feel like they're in a better space? I think that so when I first got started, I got started a few decades ago when mail still meant modems going and talking to CompuServe, right? Like, so it's been a while. And I gave the CEO a laptop, monochrome, Texas Instruments laptop, right? And it really was more of a like brick.
Weighed about 18 pounds, yeah.
It weighed about, yeah, I mean, 18 pounds was with the balloons attached, right? Like, it was heavy and it was monochrome, and it was, by today's standard, you'd be like, this is a brick. Yes, it is a brick. But the CEO loved it. He couldn't type, right? You have to understand, the guy like couldn't type, but he loved it. Why did he love it? Well, he loved it because we solved a real problem for him. The real problem was we were doing work with the Orient, with the Far East, and they were trading faxes back and forth, and he didn't have a fax machine with him all the time. And they, and so I could do emails, and it was a powerful thing for him. So here's a guy who has every reason to resist. He has every reason to resist. I don't know how to type, and this thing is crazy. And, and I literally had to go to his house and wire a jack so they could plug the modem in, right? Like, every reason. And he had one reason that mattered why he did it. And so, my question for the volunteers, there may not be a reason, right? There may not be a reason for them to do this, but I always am looking for it. How do I get that one reason that's going to drive them to go, yeah, this is painful. Yeah, there's frustration. Yeah, there's friction, whatever. But I still have to do it. Not as in someone commanded me, but it's the right thing for me. So it's not easy.
Yep. Good calls. Empathy. Empathy is the big thing in user experience. Learning how to get into the shoes of your user, understand their needs, and figure out how to resolve or address them.
So as usual, time is flying by, and we can always talk for hours amongst us, and we have in the past. But with the few minutes that we have left, Rob, what are some of the top tips that you can give practitioners who are facing a cloud adoption? Doesn't matter what platform it's on. They have an entrenched user base on an older tool. What are here are some of the Rob Bogue super secret processes or tips that you can share with folks to help them along their journey?
Yeah. So let me start with a lot of this stuff that I put together is all sitting on confidentchangemanagement.com. It's all spelled out, confidentchangemanagement.com. If you go there, you're going to find a bunch of things. One of them is it'll let you sign up for a success kit. That's all free, whatever. That's good. We have a set of communication tips. So we talked about how important communication is. If you go to /COMM TIPS, comp tips, it'll allow you to do a communication tips sort of class. It's a course. There is a change models library. So one of the things that happens when people get to try to adopt a cloud platform is they eventually run into the one person who has the basement office and runs all change programs. He has a red swing line stapler, and he is really upset. Anyway, the thing is that they are going to talk a different language than you are. And so we have a library of 23, I think, change models up on the Confident Change Management site that's free as well, /change-models. So those are some things that are really powerful for helping folks. The one last thing that I will give away as a special gift to listeners is if you go to confidentchangemanagement.com/SCI, short for science, MOT, short for motivation, /SCI MOT. That'll take you to a page which is the Science of Influence and Motivation. And it's a virtual session. And it's going to say it's $99. Hit the add to cart and watch what happens. As soon as you hit the add to cart, it'll zero it out. You just sign up and you can watch an hour about how people can be motivated. How can you get people who don't want to do something to do something? How do you get people to shock someone to the point where they think that they're going to die? How do you get people to play jailers and prisoners? And what happens when you do it? So there's all kinds of stuff that's really fun there to learn about how to motivate people.
And what was the URL for that? It was /SCI
MOT.
Any dash in there or just SCI MOT?
No, just SCI MOT, because I'm loading a coupon in there for you.
I'm not watching the Stanford experiment stuff again.
Yeah,
It's
scary,
terrifying.
right? Yeah, actually, Milgram's experiments on electrocution way scarier, because he got 70% compliance rate with people shocking other people to the point where they thought they were going to die. Like,
They thought they were killing somebody.
yeah, they thought they were killing someone. Like, what?
Yeah, the power of that lab coat and a name tag. Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, this is crazy stuff.
My favorite, Rob, tell me if you've read this, the Science of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini.
Yeah.
References a lot of that stuff. That is a favorite reference for UX for me.
Yep. Persuasion is another good book of his.
Yep, we put that out.
Yeah, so but people don't realize all these little quirky things. If I ask you guys for a little favor, right, and I come back 2 weeks later and I ask you for a bigger favor, you're more likely to do it, right? He was talking about somebody comes by and they go, hey, will you sign this petition to save the world or the whales or whatever, right? Water conservation. 2 weeks later, they come back and they go, hey, I've got a big ugly sign I want to put in your front yard that talks about water conservation, right? And the people that said yes to the first thing said yes to the second. And you're like, big ugly sign, my front yard, no. But they felt like they had defined themselves.
Internal consistency.
Yeah, yep. That internal consistency. So there's all kinds of that. So there's a whole hour of that on SciMot. On /SCI MOT.
Great. Really good stuff. So unfortunately, of course, we're out of time, as usually happens when we get rolling on a topic here. So let's go ahead and wrap this episode up. Of course, before we thank our sponsors, we want to thank our special guest, Mr. Bogue, for joining us for this conversation. And you can go to one of Rob's various websites to find more. I know you're talking at all sorts of stuff coming up. Yeah. Lots of events and whatnot. Where's the best place for people to go? Would it be the Confident Change Management, or would it be SharePoint Shepherd, or would it be Thor Projects? Where should they go?
Exactly. So yes, SharePoint Shepherd. So here's the thing: if you're trying to figure out adoption, that's the only thing you're trying to do. Go to Confident Change Management. If you're trying to figure out how to deploy SharePoint, you need special stuff. SharePointShepherd.com. If you're just trying to figure out where the heck is Rob this week, ThorProjects.com, and you basically get to see everything. And my apologies, but the filters don't work, so you're just going to get me.
We'll put all of those links in the show notes after the show. Of course, we want to thank our sponsors, Aptigent. Then we have the Bifocal Show, which I understand is on a bit of a hiatus the last couple of weeks, but new content is coming. Jason, that's correct?
Yep. Next week, we'll be recording a new show. You know, we took a little bit of time off because John's underwater. Literally, he's diving.
Literally. So, yes, our erstwhile comfort Canadian is off comforting himself with sharks for some strange reason.
Yes. He tells me that the tiger sharks like to be pet on the nose. So if he comes back without some digits, we know he was lying.
I don't believe him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have the Dallas Salesforce Developer Group that Paul runs. And I believe that talk you mentioned for Cactus Force, you're doing that at the next event, are you not, Paul, or something similar?
Yeah, I'll be repeat. It'll be a replay. I've got 2 different user groups that I'm sharing the same practice tips on there. So yeah, Cactus Force in an hour, and then at the developer user group, and then I think I'm at the Green Hills County in California user group the next. I will be tired of talking about that by next week.
Right. Very good. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for another edition. We will see you all next month on the 3rd Thursday of February or thereabouts. See y'all.
All right. Thanks all.